Most people think preppers are extreme, but that's not the reality. The average prepper isn't fantasizing about the end of the world, they're just planners. They know what many don't. This is the story of 3 preppers who weren't paranoid, just prepared. And when disaster hit, they were the ones who made it through. Chapter 1. Hurricane Irma, 2017. In 2017, Hurricane Irma tore through the Caribbean with the strength of a monster. On the Dutch island of Sint Maarten, it left devastation in its wake. Adrian lived there, and he knew better than to trust infrastructure. On an island, if ships stop coming in, food stops too. So he had stocked up. Food, water, batteries. He was ready for outages and delays. But no amount of prep could dull the raw force of Irma. 12 hours of roaring wind. Water flooding through the door. His porch roof ripped off and tossed across the island. The airport? Roofless. Military planes were evacuating people, only if their homes were destroyed. Adrian and his wife? They still had a roof, so they stayed. During the storm, they huddled in the safest room they had, a tiny, windowless bunker. He had food, but not great food. Tins of vegetables, some frozen bread. He got so hungry at one point, he looked at a cricket crawling on the floor and seriously considered eating it. And in that moment, prepping became something very real. The hero of Adrian's story wasn't a bunker or a weapon. It was a hand-cranked radio. 3 days after the storm, the static cleared and the radio began playing "I Will Survive" on repeat. Strange, sure. But eventually he picked up emergency broadcasts. It was the only thread of connection to the outside world. That and a solar charger he used to keep his phone alive. In the days that followed, Adrian became a one-man information hub, walking around the island with the blue notebook, taking notes from survivors, sharing news, piecing together what was happening. There was no order. Gas stations were destroyed. Stores were shut for weeks. 80% of the police force was homeless. Rumors flew about gangs stealing weapons from the military police. Gunshots rang out. People were tense, scared, angry. Prepping wasn't about surviving the hurricane anymore. It was about surviving after it. And Adrian? He held it together because he'd prepared for the chaos, even if he didn't realize how bad it could get.
Now, before we continue, if you want to prepare for anything in 1 hour with less than $40, grab my emergency checklist. The link is in the description.
Chapter 2. Living in a Car, Kentucky, 2009. Marana Revel grew up off-grid. No fancy gear, no internet, just practical survival, learned on the road, sleeping in the back seat of a Ford Pinto, eating sandwiches from a cooler and watching traffic as a form of entertainment. That childhood, it would end up saving her life. In 2009, Marana and her husband were moving into a mobile home in Kentucky. But before they could get settled, a massive ice storm swept through the region. It blanketed everything from Kansas to West Virginia, knocking out power to more than 500,000 homes. They couldn't stay in the trailer. It wasn't insulated. The gas lines were shut off. The trees were groaning under the weight of ice, threatening to collapse at any moment. At first, they tried crashing at a friend's place. But then came the call. Her husband's computer repair shop was being looted. So they did something most people would find unthinkable. They camped out in their car, not because they were reckless, because they were ready. Their 1986 Toyota Camry became home. Not a safe house, not a shelter, just a well-prepped sedan. Inside, they had gallons of water, Mylar emergency blankets from Walmart, pillows, towels shoved in the windows to keep the cold out, even romance novels to pass the time. Marana had thought through everything. Her husband was diabetic. If his feet got too cold, he could lose them. So she brought a digital thermometer to monitor the temperature. She used a kitchen timer to run the car engine every 30 minutes for heat, without overdoing it and risking carbon monoxide poisoning. Yes, she even packed a battery-powered CO detector. Most people who died during that storm didn't freeze. They died from running generators in enclosed spaces. She wasn't going to let that happen. They had food stored in the trunk, using the freezing weather as a natural fridge. To heat it, they used the car engine, and when they needed to stretch, they'd walk loops around the storefront they were guarding. 5 days. That's how long they lived like that. Blankets, water, snacks, a little know-how, and a whole lot of calm in the face of chaos. Even the police were impressed. When they stopped by and offered to take Marana and her husband to a shelter, she showed them the setup. They took one look and said, "You're probably better off here," because she was.
Chapter 3. Prepping for Unemployment. Chris White didn't start prepping because he feared disaster. He started because he grew up in Japan. Prepping is cultural. Everyone has food and water for a week, just in case. No drama, just responsibility. Then he moved to Australia. His wife was from the north, where cyclones are common. Same mindset. Prepare now so you don't panic later. When Cyclone Tasha hit in 2011, it flooded Brisbane for nearly 2 months. And then in 2025, Cyclone Alfred came crashing down. More floods, more chaos. But Chris and his wife, they weren't panicking. They already had 10 days worth of food, while other people were rushing out to supermarkets, stripping shelves, buying out supplies. Chris just stayed home. The only thing he left the house for was beer, and he wasn't smug about it, just ready. But here's where Chris's story takes a turn. Because prepping wasn't just for storms, it was for survival during everyday hardship. Chris and his wife had both been casual workers in their 20s. No job security, no consistent income. Sometimes they just didn't get shifts. But they always had food, tinned beans, pasta sauce, microwave rice. Because prepping for them wasn't about catastrophe, it was about stability. The kind you can count on when everything else feels shaky. If you've never lived through a disaster, it's easy to think you'll just figure it out when the time comes. But ask anyone who has, and they'll tell you how quickly things fall apart. The power goes out, stores close, phones die, roads flood, hospitals fill up, and suddenly, you're on your own. Preppers don't wait for that moment. They prepare before it hits. No bunkers, no panic. Just extra food, clean water, warm blankets, a battery-powered radio, and maybe a romance novel or two. Because the world doesn't have to end for your life to be turned upside down. And when that happens, you'll be glad you were ready.